Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Seed Speaks. My name is Ashley Robinson, and I'm the editor of the Alberta Seed Guide. Today, I'll be acting as your host for this episode. On today's episode of Seed Speaks, we're taking a closer look at how you can use weather forecasts to grow the best possible crop. I'd like to say a quick thank you to our panelists today, who are Chris Manchur, David Clay, and Wade Kent for joining us. And to those watching, please don't hesitate to ask any questions you may have for our guests in the chat box. And let's start with getting to know our panelists. Chris, can you please tell me about your work at the Canola Council of Canada?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So my name is Chris Manchur. I'm an agronomy specialist with the Canola Council of Canada, and I kind of operate at the intersection of meeting with researchers, industry, growers, and agronomists, and where we kind of interact with the whole kind of value chain with the canola here in Canada. And so partially with my roles with that is that I also am a kind of territory representative for the Eastern Manitoba half, talking with people in that area, as well as I provide some key leadership in areas such as research administration for two of our key funding programs, both ones called CARP and then our newest one called Sustainable CAP. And I also help with plant pathology advice and expertise looking specifically at sclerotinia, and most specifically on that, looking at, say, developing risk tools as well as providing recommendations across Canada.
Thank you, Chris. And David, thanks so much for being here. Can you tell me a bit more about your research work at South Dakota State University?
Hi, my name's David Clay. I'm a distinguished professor of soil biogeochemistry at South Dakota State University. And I've been here for over 30 years. And I do a lot of work with individual farmers. We do a lot of on-farm trials. And we have a number of different products that are related to precision farming. And that's kind of what we've been working on here at South Dakota State University for many, many years.
Thank you. And certainly last but not least, Wade, can you tell me about your work at Nutrien?
Thank you. Yeah, I am the senior principal digital agronomist at Nutrien. So my work focuses a lot on big data. So utilizing all of the different spatial data that we collect internally off of our fleets, as well as what our customers collect, and bringing that together with agronomic recommendations across the board. So looking at it both from a national, regional, down to a local level to work with our customers on what's going to work best for them on their farms.
Thank you all. So let's get going on the discussion. Wade, I think I'll ask you the first question, and then I'll let the rest of you add anything you may have to it. So what forecasting systems / apps do you recommend farmers should use? Should they be using more than one?
I think the best way to answer that is it is dependent on the grower, right? And what they're most comfortable with, what they like to use. Of course, we actually at Nutrien have a meteorology team, and we have a channel on YouTube where we put out a weekly update that kind of looks at the long-term forecast, utilizes several different models, and gives background on that. But overall, when it comes to applications, it's really up to the user, what they like to use, what they like to see, and what they think is the most accurate.
Thank you. Chris, David?
So I like to think that we need to have recommendations that are locally based. Having a state-based recommendation or a continent-based recommendation isn't going to help us very much. And so no matter what we do, whether we use an app or we use some public information, we need to be getting to the point that we can make recommendations at the local level. And I think there's a lot of technologies that are coming on in line that are helping us move in those directions. And we'll talk a little bit about that perhaps a little bit later. But again, I think we need to be moving in that direction. And then the other thing is, I think what people need to do is try things out before they purchase different apps and different programs.
Those are all really good points. I know for myself, I live in Winnipeg, but my family has a farm down in Pearson, which is 4 hours from the city. So yes, just because Manitoba may be having some certain kind of weather, I can be having completely different weather on a day, any chosen day than my family at our farm. So yeah, I completely agree with that. Chris, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, Wade kind of touched on something there, talking about, what kind of models are available for that and what the forecasts actually kind of put these things together. It kind of reminds me of the statistician back in the day, George Box, who famously said that all models are incorrect, but some are useful. And so when I think about that and, choosing which ones you want to have, it has to be purpose driven, knowing that only some of them may have elements that you actually need information from. And then you have to kind of look back into your farm and say, okay, what information do I require to actually make those decisions that actually make an impact on their farm? Because, we could spend a lot of times just looking at the forecasts, 2-1 weeks later and trying to make a decision on that. But you need that correct information in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
So can I make a comment on that?
Of course.
And so what Chris is saying is, which is absolutely true, identify what you're trying to accomplish. If I'm applying fertilizers, that's different than if I'm trying to control weeds with a herbicide. Generally, what we see is that our herbicides are most effective somewhere between the temperatures of 65 and 85 versus applying fertilizers that when it's cooler, that might be a perfect time to apply fertilizers to reduce volatilization losses. And so identify what you want and then use that information to help solve the problems that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that plays in my next question, which I'm going to ask you guys, what should farmers pay attention to for forecasts when making decisions on how to apply insecticides, herbicides, or fungicide treatments or anything like that? Maybe David, I'll let you take that one first since you were already kind of going down that route.
Okay. I think people can use that information for a variety of purposes. When I'm thinking about what the climate information is, that's really important when I start thinking about fertilizers. When I apply urea to our soils, when I apply that urea, it's rapidly hydrolyzed into ammonia, which can be lost as a gas. If the temperatures are cool, that risk is less than if the temperatures are warm. If it rains, that fertilizer can then be leached into the soil, preventing those losses. And so if we're trying to be efficient and minimize our impact on the environment, the climate information is really, really important. And that's probably going to be one of the first steps when I start thinking about how do we do different sorts of activities that are going to optimize productivity and minimize the impact on the environment.
Yeah, definitely. Really good points, because I know we're all stuck in that kind of, well, not stuck, but there's a lot of discussion around how to be more sustainable and when we're looking at how we apply different products and stuff to our crops. So yeah, definitely. I feel like we always talk about how the weather impacts those decisions. Chris, Wade, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'm thinking, across our canola acres, and specifically, I love talking about the Sclerotinia pathogen and such, is that we definitely want to not consider forecasting as, say, looking at a particular point in time where, we get 3 inches of rain in one event. When you're looking at, say, pathogen management and applying a fungicide, you have to think that it's actually a period of time where these conditions are actually favorable for that. So you need to take a look, over the kind of either historical periods for those times or in that kind of immediate forecast. What was your soil temperature? What was the moisture? What was the humidity in that canopy? There's a lot of different factors that actually play into this role into making a fungicide decision that extends past what that precipitation amount was at a particular time. So I really encourage everyone to actually take a look at the progress of the weather patterns that's happening, even in a 2 or 3 week period.
Yeah, I would echo all of that, right? You're looking at it it is a snapshot in time, but you want to go back and look, especially if you take something like planting date into consideration. You're going to want to look at what temperature and precip look like, 3 to 10 days prior to that, or do you have cold, wet soils? moving forward after that planting date, is it going to be cool and wet? Are we going to have adequate temperature to drive soil temperature to have germination occur? And we're not going to run into things like imbibitional chilling and stand loss. I mean, we're definitely factoring that in. And then as you move throughout the growing season, especially around something like corn, as David said, when we start making those in-season nitrogen management decisions, have we had excess rain? Do we need to adjust rates? Has it been dry? Do we want to lower? So I mean, you're always going to be looking at it. And I think it's look at the short term, within the day of the decision of whatever application or treatment's going to be made, but also what has happened, past month, 2 to 3 weeks past, and what does it look like 10 days after.
And of course, weather forecasting can be great, but sometimes things can just sneak up on us. So what happens if you, let's say, put that fungicide out there, or you spread that fertilizer, and then the next day you get a big rain? What can we do kind of to make sure that we're still being sustainable and helping the crop the best we can? I'll let Engman tackle that.
I mean, I think that comes down to what was the application that was made, right? So I mean, if it's a herbicide or a fungicide, they do have surfactants. They are going to stick around. It's just, was it a lot of rain, and is it going to continue? Because the more water we have, along with temperature, you're going to lose that residual. But with fertilizer, especially something like nitrogen, depending on form, obviously, but for the most part, you may have to make some adjustments. It definitely has to be a consideration. That if you put N out there something like 32% and you get a large rain, how much of that was lost? How much of that's not going to make it to the plant? Do we need to go back out there and make a rescue application, or can we stick with what we have?
Definitely. David?
So Ashley, in a perfect world, we're not going to have that problem, because we're going to know what the weather is, right? And that's where we're striving toward. When I like to sail, and one of the things that we're always working for is that we'd like some wind to help us move our boats along when we're sailing. And I think it's amazing how accurate some of our recommendations are relative to wind speed. We were having a race this early August, last August, and we were saying we can't start the race until 11 o'clock because that's when the wind's going to go from about 0 to 10 miles an hour. And sure and behold, that's what actually happened. And so as we work toward improving our weather accuracy, the problems with those sorts of problems that we're talking about are going to be minimized. In the same time, if we look at our weather forecast and the label says do not apply before rain, perhaps we need to think about, if the weather forecast for the next day is 50% chance of rain, maybe we want to think about when we want to apply those materials.
Definitely. Chris, anything to add?
Yeah, my perspective on this is that it really comes down to what kind of risk are we actually going to be encountering for that. We do have a lot of these labels that have rain fast periods and all that. And if you do get that precipitation event that happens right at the end, what is kind of the return on investment if you need to go back there and apply another herbicide or a pesticide? Is it going to be a weeds issue? Like, are we going to be seeing potentially some herbicide resistance concerns happening? Or is that crop going to actually crowd over? So, not only, taking like a crop protection guide and label, like you really have to kind of think about the economics of actually going back into those fields for that. And I think another thing to consider is that while some of that rain will definitely wash it away, Wade mentioned that there is surfactants, there's chemicals inside there that will help it stick to those plants. So while you may not have 100% of advertised efficacy, there is still going to be an impact there.
Those are really great points, because we've seen a lot of tech advancements that definitely help out in these instances.
The other part of that, Ashley, is when a farmer is making those decisions, they need to talk with their local agronomist that can help them provide that information that they need in order to make an accurate and correct decision. If there's rainfall concerns, then they need to have that information at the tips of their fingertips so they can make the right decisions.
Mm-hmm. And I want to backtrack a bit on a point that you made there before, David, about how we're really getting very detailed forecasts now. So can we look back and see how have forecasts changed over the years? Are we able to get more detailed forecasts for some of those remote areas where people are farming? I'll let you take this one first, David.
Okay. So in the past, we've struggled with weather predictions. This is something that we've struggled forever since we've been doing agronomy. Originally, and I'm heard that there's even perhaps people that get it wrong, there might be human sacrifices. Today, weather forecasts are based on Doppler radar, satellite data, weather balloons, surface stations, supercomputers to process the information. And we use that information for a variety of purposes, ranging from irrigation to applying pesticides. Where things are going, and I've been reading some papers that people are writing for areas in remote areas. And what people are trying to do is they're trying to perhaps change the algorithms that we use to predict weather from a process-based model that might be based on the use of mathematics to describe natural systems to the use of machine learning to make those predictions. So I was reading a paper, and what they were saying is they're using just normal weather data. And what they were able to do with that data that you might get off of a weather station, they were using that to predict what their water distribution was in the top 6 feet. And so when we start thinking about how we do things, it's likely that what we're doing today is not going to be what we're doing in the future. And those things, the use of machine learning and some of these artificial intelligence techniques are really going to take us to the next step.
That's also interesting.
I think David raises a good point there, right? In that models are improving every day. Like Chris said, they're not always right, but they're becoming more right. And with the advancements in AI and machine learning, you're going to see this. I think you're going to see weather become more accurate, right? And resolution getting greater. The technology is improving in that aspect as well. The same thing is, as growers potentially put out more weather stations, that can really help in rural areas as well. All of that data is much easier to capture and be utilized in a lot of these different systems that we've been talking about. So I think it is going to improve, right? I think the short term is going to become very accurate, right? But it's how many days prior can we actually be predictive, right? Is it 14? Is it 21? I think that's when we really unlock the potential. Is within 7 days, most of the time we're pretty accurate. Within 2 days, we're pretty confident in what's going to happen when we look at an app and see what they're predicting. But from a decision-making standpoint, the power is really going to come in when we can get past, I've been told 14 days is pretty much where they right now, where they really trust that they're moving along and can trust that forecast to a pretty high point. But I think, can we get beyond that? Can we get out 30 days? And that's really going to be when I think we see real advancement in using forecasts to make agronomic decisions.
Good points. Chris?
Yeah, I think back to our family farm, and even I guess it would be a long time for me, but maybe not for some others. And it really came down to, what we heard on the CB radio coming through for the forecasts back then from the government broadcasts, and then just looking out our back porch. We lived about a 4-hour drive north of Winnipeg, where we just didn't have access to a lot of these other kind of measurement tools back then. But nowadays we have such granularity of data and all these different kind of data points. We've been talking about weather stations that growers and agronomists are putting all across the prairies. And then, adding to that, we have all this information on this smartphone that really we only had access to for, 13, maybe 15 years. So we've really been building a lot of this data on a very kind of small level. Now it's just trying to figure out, how can we optimize all this information? How do we input this into these algorithms, into these models that, other panelists here have been talking about AI and machine learning. So I think there's going to be quite a lot of potential, moving forward to improving these predictions and extending past, potentially that 2-week certainty of forecasting.
Yeah, those are all some really good points. David, do you have something to add?
Yeah, my son works as an agronomist in Western South Dakota. And as an agronomist, his farmers are routinely asking him, what do you think is going to happen with the weather? And now Western South Dakota is it's a semi-arid environment where people are typically limited by the rainfall. Information about weather in that environment is really important when they start making decisions for a variety of things. It could be for diseases. It could be diseases in soybeans. It could be for diseases in wheat. It could be for different sorts of nitrogen recommendations for corn. But that information is critical as people start thinking about how they're going to make those decisions. And it's not just the decisions for them, it's decisions that might be occurring down in Kansas. Because if it's raining in Kansas, it's likely that, or if it's not raining in Kansas, that's going to influence whether or not they're going to get a protein premium for the wheat that they grow in South Dakota, North Dakota, and up into Canada. So that information is important. And I think as time progresses, we're going to get pretty good at providing both short-term and improving our long-term recommendations. And I think those are things that we can look forward to.
All great points. And Chris and Wade, you guys both mentioned on-farm forecasting systems. So are they worth the investment? Like, I know they've changed a lot over the years, but do you really think they're worth the investment? Because they can cost a lot.
I would say I think it depends on the grower, right? And I say that because I've used them, I've installed them myself on a few different farms, and I like them, right? The issue is there's something you got to keep them up, right? Birds, all kinds of fun stuff can happen to them. But I do think that it does give you a more localized understanding of what's happening throughout the season. And I think that the growers that I've talked to that use them and like them, they swear by them just because they're looking at it directly, right? And I gotta point out, I don't think you want to install one right outside the shop. You want to have a few that kind of are spread out across the area in which you're farming, just because things change. And if you have a large field that's a mile or longer, right, we can see a rain cloud go over one side of that and drop a 1/4 inch of water, and the other half of the field doesn't get anything. So I think that has to be taken into consideration. But I definitely think that it can be useful, and that growers should definitely consider it. And again, right, the more that we put out, the greater the network we have, the higher the resolution, the more data that we can generate to understand what's really happening within an area.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Wade, there. Just because you put a weather station on one corner of your field doesn't mean that it's going to be representative of your entire field. I stole the words right out of my mouth. But talking about weather stations, not just measuring precipitation, there's a lot of different components that can be added on and integrated into these systems. And, one thing that I think back to is, soil probes, looking at the soil moisture and taking a look at that, especially in, say, irrigated acres. I'm looking at the brown soil zone, and even further in southern Alberta, where we have a lot of canola production for seed. And if you have all this information kind of put together, and especially on these center pivot systems where you can get plenty of information specifically on those growing conditions and then the amount of irrigation that you may need to apply for that, that's excellent. That's something that likely a general forecasting system won't be able to provide. So I would definitely encourage, in those specific circumstances, to have those weather stations present.
So Chris and Wade, would you recommend that information would be sent to an individual farmer, or is that something that agronomists or their co-ops should be providing that information?
I mean, I think in the end, it's kind of, it depends, right? As a farmer, I want that information, and I'm going to install those on my farm, right? And the opportunity to share that can be beneficial, right? As working for a retailer, I'm in the same boat. I think that we do put out weather stations, and we do share that, right? So I mean, I think it's really working together to get the resolution and understand what's going on. And so I mean, I'm the first question you get asked as an agronomist when you walk onto any farm, as everybody knows, is what we've seen in the last 2 months with weather, what's that going to do to my crop? And so having that information, I think that makes that conversation more robust, and it allows for stronger recommendations to be made.
Yeah, totally agree. I think sharing that information is very valuable. If a grower has weather stations across their fields, having that information accessible by their agronomists is definitely very useful, because they may be able to take a look at different kinds of data points and actually come to some interesting conclusions. Whether they actually need to be applying that fungicide at that particular time, or maybe it's okay right now. The other thing too is that I've seen a lot of different kinds of models for agronomy providers. You have dedicated kind of digital agronomy specialists that put all this information together in a wide network, and then you also have agronomists that are third party that work kind of one-on-one with the agronomist in their local region. So I think there's sharing that information is definitely valuable.
All great points. And we've mentioned agronomists so many times so far. So what role do they really play when it comes to on-farm agronomy decisions when weather is involved? David?
I think some of our industry partners need to be answering that question, because they do that every day.
Wait, Chris?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a consideration in every decision that is made, right? I mean, right now, I'm fielding questions about planning for next season based on the weather that we've seen. We have drought in a lot of areas. We are seeing soil moisture lower than we'd like to see, and so that is actually impacting decisions that are being made right now. As we move forward, we're going to continue to watch that. But as we move in season, take something like nitrogen, we're looking at, if we have customers that are making applications in season, we're definitely considering what the moisture has been. What does, do we need to adjust rates? Do we need to change the plan? Any time that you walk into a field to troubleshoot an issue, as an agronomist, you've looked at what the weather has done over the last 2 to 3 weeks. And so, I mean, it's in every decision that we make. It's in every conversation that we have. Because it really is what points us in the direction of providing the best recommendation to our customer.
Yeah, and a lot of those things, Wade, that you touched on, agronomists are always going to be providing that kind of information and having those conversations with their growers, no matter what, if they have a weather station in their fields or not. I think providing that kind of service and tying together these climate patterns into their seeding plans, into their whether it's fertility or pesticide treatment plans is going to be really critical, because this is where your return on investment can pay off, where the timing of all those products, as well as decision to actually have them or not, is really, really important. And so when the agronomist actually comes into this conversation and you're actually discussing it with another person, rather than a grower just trying to interpret that data themselves, that's where I really see the value.
So the way I like to think about this question is, many of our farmers have very, very thin margins, and they're not making millions of dollars per acre. And agronomists help them understand the information that they're collecting so they can make their best decisions. The ultimate decisions about what they're going to do is up to the small business and in some or crops or varieties or whatever they're going to be planting, the fertilizers, all that are integrated together when they start thinking about producing a productive crop. So I agree with what our other panelists were saying. I would just add to that agronomists really provide that information for a decision that the farmers need to make.
Yeah, definitely. And we're coming up on time, but I think we have time just to sneak in one quick more question. If you guys can all just do a rapid fire response. So, of course, we're always looking towards the future. So are there any advancements in forecasting tech on the horizon that farmers should keep their eye on? Chris, I'll let you go first, and then we'll go around the room.
Yeah, I think, going back to the big buzzword AI, I think improving these models based off of this massive collection of information is going to be really, really exciting to see. There's a number of companies that are trying to tackle this problem, but what I do see is that climate predictions, even going 6 months into the future, is actually going to become a lot more reliable as we continue to investigate this.
Thank you. David?
So what AI does for us, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, what AI does is it takes massive amount of information, but as opposed to our traditional way is we've got a fixed result based on what we input it, AI learns from itself. And so as it's learning from itself our weather predictions will improve into the future.
And Wade's last words.
Yeah, I think, in discussions with our meteorology team here, they've said that, right? As the resolution improves, they get better data, higher quality data. The models are improving. And then with that, applying these other technologies to help better understand that data and actually use it to make decisions is really what we're going to see. And I mean, overall, they're optimistic on the overall forecasting capabilities improving well into the future.
Thank you, guys. And well, I think we could probably talk for hours upon this. This has been such a great conversation. Unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, Wade. And thank you, David, for being here with us to talk. I really enjoyed hearing all your insights, and I'm really looking forward to reviewing our discussion and writing a story on it. And for those watching, thank you for tuning in. And if you missed part of today's live stream, don't worry. We'll have it available on demand on our websites, on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And if you have any other questions about the subject or ideas for future topics we should tackle, just send a message to one Seed World's Facebook pages, or feel free to reach out to myself. And next week, tune in as my colleague Rebecca Carmelli-Pelsack has some guests on to chat about how often our meteorologists write. Thanks for watching, and have a great rest of your day.